welcome to another edition of Football Game Plan's Fantasy Football Starting Lineup. I'm Emery Hunt, the czar of the playbook. That's Chris James. He's at CJ Florida9 on Twitter. I'm at FBall Game Plan on Twitter. That's McMain High School. We both played high school ball at McMain High School in New Orleans, Louisiana, home of the Mustangs. And CJ's good talking ball with you once again this week. And I have to say, man, usually I'm here either with a bright colored polo or, a Raging Cajun sweatshirt, but I see you have some pretty cool threads on yourself, man. Where you get that shirt from?
Well, I had to, shout out to the beautiful folks over at Ninth and Lux, the designers over there for keeping me fresh as possible. I think it's ninethandlux.com is the website, so definitely check them out. They have everything you need from shirts all the way down to the shoes.
Wow, they got shoes, so I'm going to have to check it out, ninethandlux.com. Good stuff they got over there from, like you said, shirts, hats, scarves, scullies, everything. So shout out to the good people and good designer. I believe Jamal Lewis is the main designer CEO over there at Ninth and Lux. Ninethandlux.com, where you can get fitted up and fitted out from the best. So CJ, it's week 9 in the NFL. It is the midway point, and we got a lot to get into in this episode. We're going to talk, some MVPs, some rookies of the years. It's just surprising that it is already the midway point of the season. So, when you look at this and you think about where we were in the beginning to where we are now, what's your biggest takeaway from the NFL season so far?
Things seem to have, outside of injuries, which seriously, we had another major one to a guy picked in the top couple of rounds, but other than injuries, it's getting a second chance, things coming back around. So with my quarterbacks that are on the waiver wire, you'll get to see that because I think people have fallen out of favor, come back in favor, and now they're kind of just floating someplace.
That's a good segue into the waiver wire. And as we always like to tell the folks, subscribe on YouTube at youtube.com/footballgameplan. That's the Football Game Plan Network. Subscribe on iTunes, Football Game Plan Podcast. Leave us a 5-star rating. Also follow us on social media. That's Facebook at Football Game Plan, Instagram Football Game Plan, Twitter CJ Florida9, and I'm at FBall Game Plan. So jumping into that waiver wire, Chris, starting with your quarterbacks, who are some guys that you are trying to see come back around and have success?
Sure. So I'm going to go with a guy that has been the talk of the NFL for actual football and fantasy football, and that's Cam Newton. He actually had a decent game against a Buffalo Bills defense, which isn't as good as last year, but it's still a competent defense. And this week on Monday Night Football, they get to play the Jets. They played a little bit better, but they're not of the caliber of the Bills. I think Cam Newton gets it going in this game. Next up is Drew Lock. He had a big comeback in a big fourth quarter against the Chargers, and he gets the pleasure of playing against an Atlanta team that played better last week, but they're still not as talented as they should be when they started the season. So Drew Lock could have a good week. And also Nick Foles. Again, they're playing Tennessee. They're going to have to put up some points. I think Nick Foles can get it done this week, especially since even though they made a trade to try to get better in the slot area, they still don't know how to defend against a guy like Allen Robinson, so he should have a pretty big week.
Yeah, Nick Foles nearly led the Bears over the Saints last weekend. We saw how chaotic that game was from start to finish. That game was like 9 hours long. And, it's just interesting how the Bears, you look at them on paper and say, you know what, this team has talent. You watch them play, they say they really aren't as good as their record indicates, yet they always find themselves in games with a chance.
Yeah, and I said it was going to look, it was a little higher score than I thought, but honestly, I thought it was going to look like a 1989 Saints versus Bears game where people just punch each other in the face, literally.
I like how you slid that in there. That was a great one. Looking at the running back position, I see you hanging out in the Midwestern part of our country to find some guys on the waiver wire.
Now, I usually don't do this, but I'm going to double it up. Running back is scarce this year, especially on the waiver wire, so why not go with 2 Green Bay Packers since half of their running back core got COVID, and the other half is still dealing with an injury. So why not go with Tyler Ervin? He was getting snaps even before any of this happened, so I expect his snap count to go up. And then Dexter Williams, who they called up off the practice squad, I think that he's going to end up getting some burn. And then Zach Moss. He had 2 touchdowns, last week or whatnot. He's the goal line guy. And in the Seattle game, look, they're going to get down there. They don't want Josh Allen to keep hammering himself in the defender, so they're going to use Zach Moss. I think he can get a touchdown, maybe even 2 in the Seattle game.
At wide receiver, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on these guys because when you look at these lists, you figure, man, these guys should be on rosters and should be thriving this year, but that shows you how weird 2020 has been. So who are some of the receivers that you're looking at on the waiver wire?
Part of it is due to depth, to be candid. But then this guy also just hasn't had the season. But now with an injury to his compadre, he's the number one receiver, and that's Marvin Jones. He's been a fantasy, I'm not going to say stud, but he's been a fantasy valuable piece in the past. Hasn't been this season. Now that he's the number one guy, he can probably get it going against Minnesota. Jerry Jeudy, again, a rookie who's floating out there at about that 50% mark. They get to play Atlanta. He'll be the top target for Drew Lock. Darnell Mooney, mentioned him last week. Now he gets to play Tennessee. He is a speed guy. I think that he could have a big game over the top. And then Preston Williams. Listen, Arizona still has a cover corner in Patrick Peterson, who isn't the same guy, but he does a great job against bigger body receivers. I think he'll match up with Devontae Parker most of the game. Preston Williams will probably be the guy who's the beneficiary.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how they, go out there and attack the Cardinals, because outside of Peterson, they do have some good depth back there, and they do have a good slot corner in Byron Murphy. They have a good safety in Budda Baker, but we're going to see how well they're stacked at corner with the receivers and the RPO game that Miami will try to come in to Arizona and implement. When you look at the tight end position, one guy on this list, it's almost like once he's out that Indianapolis Colts uniform, his powers are gone.
Snatched.
So dive into the tight ends for me.
Absolutely. So Eric Ebron, a guy who could benefit from a linebacking core that has not been defending well. He did a decent job last week against the tight end position, but Eric Ebron could step up. And then a guy who will not get a lot of targets, but he'll probably get goal line work, and that's Jared Cook. Odd to say that about a tight end, but everyone who's played fantasy knows that that's been a wasteland this year outside of maybe 5 guys. So he can be a flyer this weekend, which should be a higher scoring game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Yeah, I'm shocked at how ineffective tight ends have been so far this year in fantasy. From rookies to seasoned vets. It's just been like you said, a wasteland. What hasn't been a wasteland is how good some defenses have played this year, especially when they face certain teams and certain quarterbacks.
Absolutely. So this one is a divisional matchup where the football team gets to play Daniel Jones. I mean, not to pile on a young man, but he's been a turnover machine this year. Then you have the Houston Texans. This is a sneaky play. They get to play a rookie quarterback in Jake Ludon, 6th-round pick. So fire them up against Jacksonville. And then the Broncos against Atlanta. Again, Atlanta just can't get right. It just looks like an odd situation. Even though they should be 3-0 over the last 3 games, they get to play the Broncos, and the Broncos do not have a bad defense. They just have had some miscues on defense. So this could be a sneaky play as well.
I think that might be my pick for the most entertaining game for the weekend. I think that's going to be a fun game. I like the Broncos offense. I like what they have out there. They look like they're having fun. They play really hard for Vic Fangio out there on both sides of the ball. They got a great win last week against the Chargers. And, we hope you guys got a good win last week on your fantasy teams, looking at this waiver wire list, and we'll be back with more football game plans, fantasy football starting lineup. Football Game Plan is brought to you in part by Financial Coaching LLC, investment, retirement, security, stewardship credit. Financial growth is in your hands. Stewardshipcredit.com. Adrienne Marie Photo, photographer, writer, management. AdrienneMariePhotography.com. Lock Multimedia. And welcome back to Football Game Plan's Fantasy Football Starting Lineup. Emory Hunt, the czar of the playbook. Chris James, the football analyst here for Football Game Plan, doing a great job on this show. Chris, now it's time to get into the midseason awards, and we're going to break this up, through midseason MVPs, Rookie of the Years, team player that is likely to break out in the second half, that's likely to bust in the second half. We have this on our show. On the NFL All 32 show, we're doing some more, midseason awards. So we have our midseason mock draft. So it's midseason week essentially here on Football Game Plan. But starting with your midseason fantasy football MVP, you want to give an honorable mention to someone that was going to be probably the star of the NFL this year.
This man led the NFL in passing a week after he was injured, and that's Dak Prescott. This guy single-handedly won weeks. He did for me. I'm sure he did for some of you all. So we got to mention Dak Prescott because, to Emery's point, there's a good, strong case for him being fantasy MVP and setting the NFL passing record. Number 5 is Patrick Mahomes. You know what he's done this year. I mean, he had 5 touchdowns just last week. And then a couple of running backs stretch it out. I'm gonna go with Derrick Henry as the number 4 guy. Big dude, a guy that big, running that hard. 200 yards a couple of weeks ago. You look at Dalvin Cook. Dalvin Cook just had 4 touchdowns for no apparent reason. Why? Because he's Dalvin Cook and he's that good. And then a guy who's putting up historic numbers in the receiving game as a running back, and that's my number 1 guy. So I'm gonna go with number 2 is Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson's been cooking. I mean, he had 1 bad game, and to be honest, if you lost that week, it might be your team, not Russell Wilson. And then my number 1 guy is Alvin Kamara. This guy's been a star. He has held the water for that offense. No Michael Thomas, Drew Brees, ineffective downfield as a passer. It's been Alvin Kamara. He has 55 receptions already.
That's ridiculous, man. He's on pace for a ridiculous year statistically. And the Saints are like, well, we paid him to be that, so we better make sure we get our money's worth. And they definitely have done that. Now, for Rookie of the Year, it's interesting because there's so many rookies that are playing really well this year on both sides of the ball, obviously, but this is fantasy, so we're talking offensive rookies. But I see you went with 2 first-round picks on this list. Yeah,
actually, a lot of these guys are going to be first-rounders. But yes, 2 first-round quarterbacks. I'm going with Joe Burrow, a guy who's had a bunch of 300-yard games in a row, including a 400-yard game, and got a win this week against a good Tennessee Titans team. And then Justin Herbert. That guy has hit the ground running, and he has not stopped. Kudos to him. Big-time player so far. 2 running backs, 1 a first-rounder in Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and then James Robinson, the undrafted guy down there in Jacksonville. He has done a great job. Took that job from everyone else in that backfield. And then, another LSU Tiger, to be honest, Justin Jefferson. He looks like the real deal. Love the guy's talent. And then CeeDee Lamb. Prior to the Dak Prescott injury, this guy looked like he was going to be a stud in the slot. He's still able to do some things. Just unfortunately, they don't have the quarterback play or the line to hold up for those receivers.
Yeah, it's a shame how quickly that Cowboys team deteriorated when Prescott went out. And it kind of...
Somebody is money.
Yeah, right. It sounds like he should be paid, right? Sounds like that's a most valuable type player, right?
Yep.
It sounds like that's a max contract player to use the term. But it kind of ties into your bust. I mean, it looks like you've been hanging out in the entire NFC East.
Unfortunately, I have, and I got this one wrong. He was number 7 on my quarterback list preseason. That's been Carson Wentz. He is not a good quarterback this year. I mean, just period. I mean, maybe in the fourth quarter in a couple of games, but he's not been a good quarterback. Another guy, Daniel Jones. He's been a turnover machine. Nice guy. Hope he does well, but he's just not getting the job done, to be honest. Running back, Zeke Elliott. He went in the top 5 of everyone's draft, no matter what the format. And he has not produced like that. I think he's running back 34 on the season on a points per game basis. Yeah, it's horrible. Miles Sanders, another guy. Part of it's been injury, but also he just hasn't looked like that guy that is a star in that backfield when he has been in the games. Mike Evans. Touchdowns have saved him for some of the people who are playing with him, but now that Antonio Brown's on the team, he is the number 3 wide receiver now on a team. That's not going to go well for a guy drafting in the top 3 rounds. Odell Beckham Jr. That was ineffective play by the quarterback. Let's just go ahead and be clear. That was all on the quarterback. If you have a different opinion, feel free to DM me. And then 2 tight ends. Zach Ertz. We'll just move on. Evan Ingram, it's been a bad connection between Daniel Jones, but also Evan Ingram hasn't played well himself, so it's just been a bad combination for those 2 guys. So those are my midseason busts.
Yeah, it's kind of the running theme for that position, like we talked about earlier in segment 1. When you look at a guy that's probably destined to break out in the second half, and these are guys that could see that late season surge to where it could help you win your fantasy teams. Starting with your breakout player, who is more likely to break out for you this year?
And preseason, I had this team making the playoffs and also beating the Patriots in that game, and that's Drew Lock. The schedule eases up a bit for him. He's gotten through the bumps and the bruises, and he looks like a real NFL quarterback, and he has real NFL receivers, so they should do well down the stretch. I'm going to go with Chase Edmonds. Listen, I'm going to get it out there. I said beforehand, draft Chase Edmonds as a stash because I believe he's the better back out of the 2 in that offense, and now he gets the chance to show it. And I don't think he's going to relinquish most of his playtime. I think he'll be the starter going forward. That's just my opinion. Jalen Reagor came back. He only had one play for a touchdown, I think like a 3-yard touchdown. But as he gets acclimated, he'll start to take over a bigger role. And I think that he can really do a lot of things that they even use Deebo Samuels in San Francisco doing. And then the final guy is Jordan Reed. The San Francisco tight end is a real thing. Yes, George Kittle is uber talented, but even 75% the value of George Kittle is still a high-level tight end one.
What's interesting? It's funny when, how fast things move in the NFL and has moved this season. Earlier in the year, we're talking about this guy as a MVP front runner, and now he's on your most likely to bust list, and that's quarterback Josh Allen.
Yeah, and part of it was, Josh Allen did his job. He did a great job. But Josh Allen also had a very soft schedule. He has the opposite effect of what Drew Lock had. Down the stretch, they play Seattle this week, but then they end up playing San Francisco, which will give them some troubles. Pittsburgh. They play at Denver. They play at New England. Listen, that's not a good, and that's the playoffs, by the way. I think at some point they played a 91 New York Giants down the stretch. He's going to have a tough time. So if you can sell Josh Allen for a good piece, go ahead and do it, like a Deshaun Watson and another piece.
It's interesting because, and I'm glad you brought that up. And if you look at the last couple of games, he hasn't played well, man. It's been 3 weeks he has not played that Josh Allen ball that we saw when he had, 11 touchdowns to 1 intercept ratio or something ridiculous like that?
Yeah, I think it was 14-1 or something crazy. It was un-Josh Allen-like, and now it's been Josh Allen-like. So it's super unfortunate that he is playing in that manner. The running back, Todd Gurley, listen, this is twofold. I think that they're going to start giving him less and less carries because they're starting to manage him. He had a lot of carries. He led the NFL in rushing touchdowns. This is the time to sell Todd Gurley if you can, because the stretch gets a little more difficult with New Orleans twice and a couple of other teams that can stop him. Also, wide receiver. Wide receiver is the position most affected by quarterback play. So Stephon Diggs, who has balled out. It's not a thing about talent. It's a thing about matchups. And Stephon Diggs, if you can sell him for a good usable piece, go ahead and do that. Maybe try to package him for a Michael Thomas with, another player. Someone might actually give you that. And then Mark Andrews. What teams are going to do now is they're going to force more exterior passes, and they're going to take away the safety blanket. I think that eventually Lamar Jackson will be able to handle that, and it will be good for Hollywood Brown, but it's going to tank the value of Mark Andrews, who's been a elite tight end one for the majority of the season.
Yeah, it shows you how much they probably miss Hayden Hurst. Because their offense just doesn't look right. Even though they're putting up good numbers and good yardage and running the football at a very high clip, they just don't look right offensively. And maybe it's because they're missing that second tight end.
Yeah, and Nick Boyle was supposed to step and be that guy this year. Early it looked fine, but now it doesn't. But then the other thing is the interior offensive line with the retirement of Yonda, and also they seem to be getting their sea legs. And there was a thing, not to go off script, but they had 3 running backs. They look better with 2, so they might want to stick to that. They might want to just stick with Gus Edwards being the pounder and J.K. Dobbins being the other back who does passing down work and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's a good observation.
For this, by the way, not to go too far off script, but New Orleans, when they had Adrian Peterson, Kamara, and Ingram, once they had no Peterson, that offense functioned way better with just 2 backs.
Yeah, and even when you look at when the Saints had Pierre, Reggie, and also I want to say Sproles.
Okay. Or was it Mike Bush or Mike Bell?
Mike Bell.
Okay.
So
yeah.
When you get down to 2, it's easy to divvy up those carries.
Absolutely.
All right. So when we come back, we'll go into your start and sitting lineup. So that was good stuff. Good mid-season report card right there from Chris, and we'll be back with more Football Game Plans, Fantasy Football starting lineup. Football Game Plan is brought to you in part by Ninth and Lux. Visit the website ninethandlux.com and check out the clothing gallery. Do You Music with featured artist IW in his latest album, Season 2. You can check that out on iTunes as well as doyoumusic.com. Nesby Phipps, art, life, entertainment. NesbyPhipps.com. Grind It Out Fitness. Visit the website grinditoutfitness.com and download the app. Be sure to order your copy of the Go-Go Offense by Coach Brennan Marion on footballgameplan.com/GoGo Offense. Coach Marion goes through the ins and outs of his explosive offense, one that's tearing up the college football field and putting a lot of points on the scoreboard. Again, you can order your copy at footballgameplan.com/GoGo Offense. And welcome back to Football Game Plan starting lineup here on Football Game Plans Network, located at youtube.com/Football Game Plan. I'm Emory Hunt. That's Chris James. Follow him at CJ Florida9. I'm at FBall Game Plan. Chris, it's time to dive into your starting lineup for Week 9. This is guys that will have great weeks above expectations. So before you dive into our mentions or in the comment section, that's what this means. So looking at Michael Thomas making a return to the Saints lineup, and he's on your starting lineup.
Absolutely. So listen, there is this whole thing about sponsorship or people trying to prove something. Michael Thomas is back in the lineup. The Saints have had all sorts of issues at wide receiver. They're going to figure out how to force feed 15 to 20 targets to Michael Thomas in this game. So we already expect him to have a pretty good game, but I think this could be a game where Michael Thomas has 11 for 121 and 2 touchdowns. It's that type of game because they're going to try to prove the point that he's back.
Now moving on to the sitting lineup, guys that you don't expect to perform at the level of expectation or their draft status. And it's funny because we talk about Michael Thomas returning. Here in your flex spot, we have another guy that's returning from injury, and that's Christian McCaffrey, who was playing really well before he went out with an injury.
Absolutely. Christian McCaffrey is an absolute stud. He is the best fantasy football player, at least at the running back position that there is. But he's also coming back from an ankle injury. And Mike Davis has done the job while he's been gone. He's not Christian McCaffrey, but he's moved well. He's looked good in the passing game. I think against the Kansas City Chiefs unit, what they're going to do is they're going to probably say, listen, we're going to give you 50 to 60% of the snaps. They're going to try to ease him back in because they don't want any sort of setback, any sort of other issue to occur with their franchise running back. So he's going to eventually be Christian McCaffrey again, but just not week 1 that he comes back.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how he does and how he integrates himself within that offense. Now, moving on to your sleepers, and I like this list you have here because it has one of my favorite receivers on there when he was coming out of the draft, and that's Deshaun Hamilton, who got in the end zone last week for the Broncos.
Yeah, so there's an injury to Tim Patrick. He has actually emerged as a guy who's been a good player. Yeah, Jerry Jeudy's still going to be the number 1, but I expected KJ Hamler to take over the slot duties. It seems like Deshaun Hamilton has said, no, I'm a veteran and I want to do this. He did a great job last week, led the team in receiving yards, and had a touchdown, I believe. So I expect this in this week when they, again, play against the Atlanta Falcons, who do not have someone to cover the slot.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. Again, that's going to be my favorite game to watch this upcoming weekend. So we have completed this midseason report here on Football Game Plan's Fantasy Football Starting Lineup. That's Chris James. I'm Emory Hunt. Follow him on Twitter at CJ Florida9. I'm at FBall Game Plan. Subscribe on YouTube to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Football Game Plan and on iTunes. We'll get some new podcasts up and running, but most of our podcasts are done in the spring, but you still want to listen to some of the good content that we have on our podcast network, which is on iTunes at Football Game Plan Podcast, as well as on SoundCloud at soundcloud.com/FBGP Podcast. So good luck this week, and we wish you the best of luck the rest of the season.
Yeah.